Thank you for having me, and I'm happy to be here as well. So this is an introduction to Norse mythology. I'm glad people are here for it, but it shouldn't be too surprising because Norse mythology is everywhere. It appears in our movies, our TV shows, such as the Marvel movies with Thor. Now Norse gods have become a billion-dollar franchise. It's in video games like God of War, and it's inspired the fantasy genre. J.R.R. Tolkien was heavily inspired by Norse mythology when he wrote The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, as we'll see. But even if you somehow have no connection to any of these things, I guarantee you have at least one connection with Norse mythology, and you've interacted with it your entire life. In fact, you and probably your parents and their parents before them. Because today is Wednesday, named after the Norse god Odin. It uses his Old English name, Woden, so Woden's Day, Wednesday. In fact, most of the days of the week are named after Norse gods. Yesterday was Tuesday, named after the one-handed god Tyr. Tomorrow is Thursday, named after the god Thor. And the day after that is Friday, named after the goddess Frigg, Odin's wife. So clearly, Norse mythology has a strong connection with us today. But then the question becomes, how do I introduce you to it? How do I tell the story that has spanned for hundreds of years? So I thought the best way to do it was the same way that the Vikings would have started a story of Norse mythology, the same way they would have told the myths. So picture you're in a great hall. There's a fire roaring in the center. People are feasting at the table, drinking mead. The chieftain is in the high seat, and then one man stands up, the skald, the poet, and he says this: Vilja kjol at høres ledi, medan gillingsjodum ypik in I sørter, or så jodum farmagnudar filja gandjebar. I would wish for a hearing for the drink of Odin, while I lift up the payment for Gillingar, which Odin the traveler carried from the treasure fields of Surtur. This is a reference to the myth of the mead of poetry. So there was a wise god called Kvasir, and he was killed by dwarves, and the dwarves turned his blood into mead, called the mead of poetry. And whoever drank it would have the ability to compose amazing poetry. Odin, the king of the gods, whose today is named after, wanted this mead, so he used shape-shifting and disguises and false names in order to get it. And he bestows it on all the good poets, and that's where their poetry comes from. So whenever a poet would speak poetry, they would be calling on the power of that god. Poetry is important to understanding Norse mythology because it is the entire reason that Norse mythology exists. It saved Norse mythology. The Norse were an oral culture. They didn't write anything down. Instead, they preferred to compose poems, memorize them, and then pass them down for future generations. In fact, they enjoyed poetry so much that they would pass down poems about Norse gods even after the Christianization outlawed pagan worship. And eventually they passed it down so much that someone in Iceland wrote them down in the poetic Edda. So this is a collection of Eddic poems, half of which have to do with the gods like Thor and Odin. The other half are about legendary heroes like Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. So this is one of our main sources for Norse mythology. Most of these poems go back to the Viking Age, but it's difficult to date most of them. Additionally, poetry is responsible for our other source. So there was an Icelandic chieftain, a politician and law speaker named Snorri Sturluson. And he wanted to preserve the Norse tradition of skaldic poetry. So as the Norse became more integrated with the wider European world, they started to prefer the rhyming poetry of the Europeans. And Snorri wanted to keep around this skaldic tradition of alliteration and kennings. And in order for this to happen, he wanted to make sure that people composed new poems and understood the old ones, but the only way to do that was to teach them Norse mythology, because skaldic poetry was full of kennings. So a warrior wasn't just a warrior, he was the Thor of the sword. And they called gold, for example, the fire of Aegir, because Aegir is a character from Norse mythology whose hall is lit not by fire, but by gold. So when you said the fire of Aegir, everyone knew you meant gold. But if you don't know Norse mythology, that doesn't make any sense to you. So Snorri wrote the prose Edda, sometimes just known as the Edda. This is a guide to Norse mythology to help new poets compose skaldic poetry. He also preserves some skaldic poems in this, more recorded, just like in the Poetic Edda. You do have to be a little careful with this one, though, because Snorri is a Christian, a bit removed from the original religion and poems, so he doesn't always fully understand it, and he changes certain things. But his goal is overall to make sure you understand Norse mythology. So these are the Eddas. These are our two main sources for Norse mythology. Now, of course, there are other ones where Norse mythology is mentioned to a certain extent. There's Saxo Grammaticus's Gesta Danorum, Latin history of the Danes, which mentions some Norse mythology. There are the Icelandic sagas, which also occasionally mention Norse mythology. And there are historical accounts like those of Adam of Bremen, which reports a pagan temple at Uppsala with different gods there and their functions. So now we know where our sources come from, where we should be getting our information from, because believe me, there's a lot of false stuff on the internet. And so let's begin with the story of Norse mythology, starting with the creation. So before the earth, before the world, there was nothing except two worlds. One was a world of ice and mist called Niflheim, and another a world of fire called Muspelheim. And then these two, then the fire from Muspelheim met the ice of Niflheim in the middle in a place called Ginnungagap. And the ice was melted by the fire into the shape of a man. But this wasn't a man, this was Ymir, the first Jotun, the first being. And the ice also melted into the shape of a cow named Audhumbla. And Ymir was nurtured by drinking Audhumla's milk. So the first being was drinking cow milk. And then he fathered more Jotnar. He created more beings asexually in a weird way. So his sweat became more Jotnar. We'll explain what Jotnar are in a minute. They're just a race of beings. And his two legs mated with each other and had more Jotnar. But then Audhumbla, the cow, being a cow, licked the ice that was around her into the shape of a man. But this wasn't a man either. This was Buri. Buri was the first god. And he had a son named Bor, and Bor had three sons, Vili, Ve, and Odin. We talked about Odin earlier. These are his brothers. Vili, Ve, and Odin looked at the chaotic world in front of them with the weird production of legs and sweat, and they decided to bring order to it. So they killed Ymir. They killed the first being, and then they used his body to create the earth. His blood became every river, every ocean and sea and body of water. His skull became the sky. His bones became the mountains, and his brains became the clouds. So the very world is made from the body of the first being. So as you can tell, Norse mythology is kind of weird. You've got giants making people out of their sweat and their legs, but also kind of metal, because the world is made out of killing the first being. And then after that, the gods walked on the shore and they saw two trees, and they decided to turn them into the first humans, Osk and Embla. And this is still reflected in skaldic poetry. Usually when you're referring to a human, you will call them the tree of something. So the tree of the spear is a warrior, for example. The tree of the rings is a king. So again, the world before, the world with Ymir, was chaotic. There was no sense of order. We're told that the sun, the moon, and the stars didn't know where to go or what to do. But then the gods get on their holy thrones and they bring order to the world. They tell the stars, the sun, and the moon where to go. They create day and night, evening and morning, and this allows people to tell time. They bring order to the world. And then they build temples, create blacksmithing, and make beautiful treasures. These are aspects of civilization. It sounds weird that they make temples. Who are they going to pray to? Themselves? But that shows how they create civilization. Temples are not something you just find out in the wilderness. They're a part of society, civilization, and the gods are the champions of that and of order. And we're told after they make all these things, the gods play games peacefully in the grass. But this is ruined by the arrival of the Jotun. So I've mentioned them a few times. They are the Jotnar. So typically, this word is translated as giant. I prefer to leave it untranslated as Jotun because it's not a great descriptor, because there are some giant Jotnar, but usually they're the same size as the gods. The word Jotnar is related to eater or devourer. You can actually tell because a lot of Old Norse words, if you substitute the J in the huko with an EA, you can kind of see the English word. So it says eat, and for example, the word jarl, J-A-R-L, in English is earl, E-A-R-L. And they, the Jotnar, are the enemies of the gods and mankind. They want to destroy the order that the gods have established. And the majority of myths within Norse mythology are struggles between the gods and the Jotnar. Either the Jotnar want to take something away from the gods, or the gods want to take something away from the Jotnar. In order for society to continue, the gods must always succeed. They are the heroes of the myths. Even if we personally don't always agree with their actions, you have to understand when you're reading the myths, they would have always been seen as the champion and heroes of humanity. Within the religion of Norse mythology, the Jotnar were responsible for diseases and famine. We'll see later on that Thor was specifically invoked to stop a disease by smashing the Jotun who was causing it. But within the myths, not the religion, the myths, the Jotun and the gods were capable of coexisting. Sometimes gods had children with the Jotnar. They were capable of having feasts with them, with living peacefully from time to time, but they were portrayed like a rival family or tribe. You can interact with a rival tribe, you can intermarry, but at the end of the day, they are your enemy. And after the gods created humanity, they created the dwarves, the dvergar. So the gods saw that there were maggots in Ymir's corpse, and they turned them into the first dwarves. These are ugly creatures that live in the earth, and they're great craftsmen. They make a lot of super amazing magical weapons. They are typically somewhat villainous. They help the gods a lot, but usually in stories they're kind of the bad guys, typically negative. And I don't know how many are familiar with Tolkien. So this is a line from the Eddic poem Voluspa in the Poetic Edda. It's a list of dwarf names, and anyone who's read The Hobbit should recognize these. Bifur, Bofur, Bombur, Nori, Gandalf, who in this is a dwarf, Thrain, Thorin, Fili, Kili, Oakenshield. So again, Tolkien drew heavily from Norse mythology. The world of Norse mythology created by the gods is one connected by a giant ash tree called Yggdrasil. So Yggdrasil has roots in the land of mankind, Midgardr, the land of the gods, Osgard, the land of the Jotnar, Jotunheimr, and the land of the dead, Hel, or Nibelheim. So it connects all the worlds together in that one tree. The land of the gods is known as Osgard, which means the enclosure of the gods. The word Garth is related to our word for yard, again means enclosure, because it has a wall around it built by Jotnar. It is connected to Midgard, to Earth, through the rainbow. It's a bridge called Bifrost. And typically in pop culture, Osgard, or Asgard as it's usually known, is portrayed as a giant city where the gods all live, which isn't entirely accurate to most of the myths. It's better to think of it more like our worlds, like Midgard, an entire land where the gods live with different cities and homesteads and houses. And they usually stay in their own lands, in their own halls, and keep to themselves. So, for example, Thor lives in Thrudheim and has a hall called Bilskirnir. Odin lives in Gladsheim and has a hall called Valhalla. The gods do occasionally get together for feasts or big events, but for the most part, they stay in their own lands in Osgard. So, now let's discuss the individual gods. Since it is his day, we will start with Odin. So you may know him better as Odin. That D-looking thing right there with a line through it is pronounced like a voiced TH, as in then, so Odin is the Old Norse pronunciation. And I have a quote from all the gods that we're going to discuss to kind of get in their heads. So this is a quote from Odin. Harbardr ek heti hluk navien sjaldan. My name is Harbard, I seldom conceal my name. This is funny because this is Odin concealing his name from his own son for no discernible reason. His name isn't Harbard, it's Odin. And that really summarizes Odin very well. He's a deceptive figure, very intelligent and ruthless. He's associated with war, with wisdom, poetry, the dead, magic, kingship. He's the king of the gods, according to Snorri. He has one eye and a gray beard. So he has a wife called Frigg, but he also has many other lovers. He's surprisingly good at seducing women, and he's very proud of that. He's the father of many gods, which is why Snorri says he's called the All-Father. These gods include Thor, Balder, Vili, Vidar, and Tyr. He lives in Gladsheim, as we discussed, and has a hall called Valhalla. Valhalla is where every human who dies in battle goes. So if you're in a battle and you die, you're taken by Odin's servants, the Valkyries, to live with him in Valhalla. So Odin has two ravens, Hugin and Munin, which mean thought and memory. They fly around the world and gather information which they report back to Odin. He also has two wolves called Geri and Freki. And Odin, when he's feasting in Valhalla, he prefers just to drink wine. So he feeds them his food under his table. So he's like me with my dogs. He has an 8-legged horse called Sleipnir. It has 8 legs, so that means it's super fast for some reason. That picture up there is of Sleipnir. And he has a spear called Gungnir, which has an enchantment where it always hits its target, always finds its mark. So right away we notice with what he has around him that he is a war god. Hugin and Munin, his ravens, and Geri and Freki, his wolves, are creatures that are known to feast on corpses on the battlefield. The Norse noticed that after a battle, wolves and ravens would come to eat the dead bodies. So it would make sense that a war god who causes war would be followed by ravens and wolves. Horse and a spear, of course, are the tools of a warrior. But Odin, primarily in the myths, doesn't appear as a warrior, but as a wanderer. He has over 200 names, and every time he goes wandering in disguise, he uses a different name. These include Grimnir, Harbardr, Havi, Galtar, and many, many more. So he usually has the same disguise, or some variation of it. An old man with a gray beard, one eye, and either a gray or blue cloak, or a hood, or a wide-brimmed hat. So you can see the inspiration that Tolkien got for Gandalf. An old man, gray beard, gray cloak, wide-brimmed hat, and a staff. So Odin wanders around under a different name, always under a different name. And even though he always has the exact same disguise, no one seems to recognize him, and no one seems to call him out. And a lot of times his names are like really shady. Like one of them, two of them actually are Evildoer. He says, "Hey, my name is Evildoer, and I look just like Odin." And they're all like, "Yeah, that's fine." He likes to seek wisdom, stir up conflict, and help out heroes. I also call him the god of cameos, because if you're reading a Norse saga, he just randomly shows up and does something crazy, and then they don't really talk about it. So sometimes in a Norse saga, out of nowhere, an old man with one eye will show up and like stop a storm and then leave, and they don't tell you that it's Odin. You're just supposed to know, so if you don't, you'll be really confused when you're reading sagas. Odin is also a god associated with wisdom. So one of the main features of Odin is that he has one eye. That is because there was a being called Mimir who had a well that whoever drank from it would become wise. And Odin wanted to drink from it, and Mimir said, "I will only let you drink from it if you tear out one of your eyes and give it to me." And Odin immediately does. So he sacrifices his eye for wisdom, and that's a permanent mark of him. Another thing he did was he hung himself and pierced himself with a spear for 9 nights, and doing so allowed him to get the knowledge of the runes, which are these symbols right here. They're an alphabet, but they're also used in magic. And Odin is the master of magic. He knows spells of how to resurrect the dead, stop weapons, make people fall in love with him, many, many things. He also challenges others on their wisdom and shares his wisdom, and we actually have a book of Odin's wisdom called Havamal. So this is kind of like the Old Norse equivalent of Proverbs. It's also found in the Poetic Edda. It's a collection of wisdom supposedly from Odin himself. The most famous of these is the line, Doyer fe, doyer frande, doyer silver, it somma, in orste, doyer aldregi, ve mercer godan getter. Cattle die, men die, you yourself will die, but I know one thing that will never die, the name of a man who has done great deeds. So essentially, your fame will outlive you even if you die, which is a very Viking sentiment, to die in battle with a great reputation. So let's return to Odin's aspect as the god of war. So Odin, again, has a hall called Valhalla, which means the hall of the battle slain. He has servants who are women called Valkyries, Valkyrjar, which means the choosers of the battle slain. And these Valkyries decide who will die in battle. They decide what happens in battle, and they take people who die in battle to Odin's hall in Valhalla. In Valhalla, they also serve mead, which was the role of women in Viking society. People who are taken to Valhalla after they die in battle become Odin's liegemen, his warriors, called Einherjar. So the Einherjar, every day, they wake up, they fight each other, they kill each other, they're resurrected, they feast, they go to sleep, and they do it over and over again until Ragnarok. So this is the Viking afterlife. Odin actually has a very specific reason for doing this. So we haven't talked much about Ragnarok yet. Ragnarok is the end of the world for the Norse gods. During Ragnarok, Odin is going to be swallowed whole, eaten by a giant wolf called Fenrir. So he is gathering all these dead warriors, these Einherjar, to fight alongside him in Ragnarok. His goal is to create the greatest army ever for the final battle to help him against the great wolf. So in order to make sure there are a lot of warriors in Valhalla, Odin is constantly going around and causing conflict. He just causes brothers to turn on each other, people to fight and kill each other. He starts wars, and he also decides who wins those wars. He also sometimes takes certain warriors under his wing. They become his favorites, and he'll personally assist them. He'll give them magical weapons, he'll give them battle strategies, and he'll sometimes perform amazing feats for them. But there's a catch. So the warriors who help Odin help him by killing a bunch of people in battle. They send all those warriors to Valhalla to join Odin's army. But if you're such a great warrior that you can send all these great warriors to Valhalla, wouldn't it be a shame if Odin didn't get you in Valhalla? So that's why a deal with Odin is a deal with the devil. He is eventually going to turn on you to make you die in battle so you can be with him during Ragnarok. This was actually a really good propaganda tool for warriors and worshippers of Odin. So someone who dies in battle is a loser. They died, they were killed, they lost. But if you say, no, he didn't die because he was a loser or because he was a bad warrior. He died because he was such a great warrior that Odin personally wanted him alongside him for Ragnarok. And we actually have a few examples of this in skaldic poems like Eiríksmal and Hákonarmál, where two great kings come to Valhalla, and then Odin is asked, Odin, why did you make these people die if they're so great? And Odin says, because the wolf is coming and I have to be ready and I need the best warriors by my side. This is also a good explanation for why battles just go wrong. Like, not every battle in history has gone with the stronger, better army winning. And the way to explain that is Odin wanted the stronger, better army with him in Valhalla. So to illustrate the way a deal with Odin works, we're going to look at the case of Sigmund. So Sigmund is actually a descendant of Odin, and he is having a wedding feast for his sister in his father's hall. And in his father's hall, there's this great tree in the middle called Barnstokkr, and Odin, not Odin, could be anyone, an old man with one eye and a gray beard and a blue cloak suddenly walks in, and he takes out a beautiful sword and he stabs it into the tree in the center of the hall. And he turns to the guests and he says, whoever can pull this sword from the tree will receive it as a gift from me. And all the people look at the sword and decide this is like the greatest sword ever. It is clearly a very good weapon. And they all try to pull it out, but only Sigmund is able to do it, and he does it easily. And then throughout Sigmund's life, Odin will periodically help him. He will occasionally show up and do things for him. And Sigmund, in turn, is going to kill a lot of people and send them to Valhalla, help Odin out. But then one day, Sigmund is going to be on the battlefield. He has Odin's sword in hand, and suddenly he notices, it could be anyone, an old man with one eye and a gray beard who charges towards him with a spear. And Sigmund swings the sword that Odin gave him, and it shatters on Odin's spear, on anyone's spear, into a bunch of pieces. And Sigmund dies in battle. The gift that Odin gave him has broken the moment Odin has taken his favor from him, and he goes to Valhalla. Fun fact, J.R.R. Tolkien translated the story where that takes place, and let me tell you a bit about what happens afterward. So the blade that was broken is reforged for Sigmund's son, Sigurd. Sigurd then uses it to team up with a dwarf to retake the dwarf's father's treasure, which was hidden in a cave and guarded by a dragon. And after he takes that treasure back and kills the dragon, he gets a cursed golden ring, which causes everyone to desire it and brings misfortune to whoever has it. So you can see there's some heavy influence here from Tolkien, and yeah. Anyway, so now we turn to Thor. Ekfare Astor Jotna Bardak Brudir Rolvisar Tilbjargs Gengu Mikir Mundi at Jotna ev Alir Rivdi Vetter Mundi Mana Undir Midgardi. I was in the east fighting Jotnar, evil women who live in the mountains. There would be many more Jotnar if they had all survived. Then there would not be a single human left on Midgard. So Thor is a god associated with storms, strength, thunder, wind, fertility, and protection. He has red hair and a beard. He's straightforward, honorable, and a bit of a hothead. He's also the defender of the gods and mankind, and because of that, he is the favorite of literally everyone. My most basic take ever is that Thor is my favorite god, because if you look at a map of Scandinavia, the places where all the different gods were worshipped, Thor is the favorite god in every single Scandinavian country, and it's not even close. He's worshipped everywhere. And so Thor also has a chariot drawn by two goats called Tangrisnir and Tanganjoster, and he has the ability to kill them, eat them, and then resurrect them the next day, which is useful if you don't have food. But they also fly him around on his cart. He has a magical belt, Megangjoth, and iron gloves, Jarngriper, a staff that he occasionally uses, but we all know the real thing of Thor is his hammer, Mjolnir. So it has the ability to strike with great strength. It returns whenever it's thrown. It's unbreakable, it never misses, and has the ability to, again, resurrect dead goats, which is useful for Thor. It's often worn as amulets in the Viking Age. They would wear it. Purpose isn't entirely clear, but probably protection and maybe even fertility. That hammer right there is one of my favorite Mjolnir pendants. If you don't know too much about scholars, one of them randomly decides that everything we thought was true could be wrong. And so some people started to say that maybe these pendants we found aren't Thor's hammer. And they found this one, and it has written in runes, "This is a hammer." That really ended that discussion. So Thor's role is the slayer of the Jotnar. He is consistently described as being in the east killing Jotnar. If you look at a map of Norway, the east is kind of like where the mountains and the wilderness are, so that's where you would expect all the monsters to be hiding. And Thor does this very consistently to the point where whenever the gods do get together for feasts or big events, Thor is usually not there because he's off killing Jotnar in the east. So you can see why he'd be so popular. He's a working man who is constantly out there protecting mankind from the Jotnar. And because he does this, he prevents crops from dying and sickness, because that's what the Jotnar would do. We actually have an interesting example of this. This is a Canterbury healing charm. It is from, I believe, the 11th century, and it's used to invoke Thor to strike the Jotun that is causing the disease. So when they were sick, they'd say, "A Jotun is making me sick. I'm going to ask Thor to smash that Jotun and heal me." So Thor's most famous story is when he goes fishing for Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. It's this giant snake that goes around the entire earth. And so Thor one day goes on a boat with a Jotun named Hymir, and he tells the Jotun to row out as far as possible, and then he takes the head of an ox, attaches it to a fishing line, and throws it into the water. And then Jormungandr takes the bait. The giant snake takes the bait, and Thor begins to pull it up. He pulls up so hard that his feet actually go through the boat, and then he pulls up the serpent, stares it in the eyes with angry eyes, and Hymir, the Jotun, is terrified. He cuts the line to let the serpent go, and then Thor throws Mjolnir after it, killing the serpent. But there are actually multiple versions of the story. So in a few versions, the serpent actually escapes when Hymir cuts the line. And the most likely reason for this is due to Ragnarok. So as we'll see later, Thor fights Jormungandr in Ragnarok. So that probably wasn't originally how the story goes. In the oldest versions of fishing for Jormungandr, Thor kills the serpent. And so later, when Thor and Jormungandr get drawn into Ragnarok, the serpent survives and they fight later. And we know how popular this myth was because there are multiple depictions of them that have survived. The one on the far right is from Denmark, the middle one is from the Isle of Man, and the far left is from Sweden. This is a crazy amount of depictions of myth to survive. It's very rare because they're usually carved in wood, which doesn't survive well. So the fact we have this many shows how popular the myth was. But even though that's the most famous myth, Thor's adventures were usually more comical. And the most famous comical myth is the wedding. So Thor wakes up one day and he finds that Mjolnir is missing. And this is a problem because this is what he used to kill the Jotnar and protect mankind and the gods. So he sends Loki to go look for the hammer, and then Loki finds a Jotun named Thrym. And Thrym says, I stole the hammer and I'll give it back if you let me marry the beautiful goddess Freyja. Thor goes to Freyja and says, come on, you're getting married to a Jotun. Freyja says no. So there's only one logical solution to this. Cross-dressing. Thor dresses up as the bride, dresses up as Freyja. He wears a veil, and then Loki goes with Thor as his handmaiden, but also his wingman, because Thor doesn't seem very dedicated to the bit. So he goes, and then Thrym is very happy to see Freyja, all 8 feet of her, and he notices that Freyja is eating a whole lot, drinking a whole lot, and he's like, oh, that's kind of weird, didn't expect that. And then, well, Thor is known as a big eater and drinker, and so Loki, being a wingman, says, oh, it's because she was so nervous about meeting you, she hasn't eaten or drinking anything, she just is really hungry because of that. And Thrym says, okay, that's reasonable. And so he wants to look at his bride. He takes off Freyja's veil, and he's greeted by angry red eyes that terrify him. So he jumps back and he says, why are her eyes so red and angry? And Loki says, she was so excited about meeting you, she didn't sleep a wink, and so her eyes are super red. And Thrym says, okay, that makes sense. Also, I want to point out he doesn't notice Thor's giant red beard, which either means he just wasn't paying attention or Freyja canonically has a beard. Hopefully the first one. And then Thrym is completely convinced that this is definitely Freyja, so he brings out Mjolnir. So Mjolnir, Thor was known to have a connection to fertility, not just fertility of the earth, but also for women. In fact, most Mjolnir pendants were found in women's graves. They're found in both men's and women's, but mostly in women's. And so they were believed to help a woman be more fertile to have children. So in order to ensure that the bride will be fertile, he places the hammer on his bride's lap. Thor can't believe his luck because he just put Mjolnir on his lap. And then Thor gives a very big laugh, picks up the hammer, drops the dress, and smashes the skull of his groom, and then kills all the Jotun at the wedding. And so the story ends with one simple line, and that is how Thor got his hammer back. So you see, Thor could also have very comical adventures, and many of them were. He was, in general, a very fun god to tell stories about, which is part of the reason he was so popular. And then that brings us to the Vanir. So according to Snorri, they're a second group of gods. They went to war with the Aesir, and then after that war, 3 members of the Vanir came to live with the Aesir. The Aesir are the main gods, Odin and Thor. These gods are mainly focused on wealth and fertility. So the first of the Vanir we're going to talk about is Freyja. Mer mer tidari en manna vem ungum I addakare ossa og olvatat vil engi mother at vit samt same. That woman means more to me than any woman has ever meant to any young man. But among the gods and elves, there is no one who would bless our marriage. So Freyja is a god associated with fertility, sunlight, rain, peace, marriage, and the harvest. He was also considered an ancestor of kings. The legendary kings of Sweden and Norway named themselves after him because one of his names was Yngvi Frey, and so they called themselves the Ynglings. He's the brother of Freyja and the son of Njord, and he was very popular in Sweden. So he has a magical golden boar called Gullinbursti that he rides, a magical ship called Skidbladnir. It always has fair winds, and it can be folded up and kept in your pocket, which is very useful. He also used to have a magic sword that can fight by itself. We'll talk about that. But now he uses an antler as a weapon instead of the magic sword. So Freyr makes up the last of a group I call the Big Three, which also includes Odin and Thor. So these were the three most worshipped gods during the Viking Age. They have the most place names, as you can see on that map there. Those are all places where those gods were worshipped, and they often appear together as a trio in stories. We'll get to later the story of Loki and the Six Treasures, but those three gods appear as a trio of judges. Adam of Bremen reports at the Great Temple at Uppsala that those three gods were the main ones there. So Freyr should be a big deal. Unfortunately, he is the victim of circumstance. So our sources for Norse mythology mainly come from Western Iceland, and they're mostly going to get it from, they're also going to get some from Western Norway on the coast. Freyr, all his place names where he was known in Iceland, there are like 2 or 3 in the Far East. He was mainly worshipped again in Sweden. So because he wasn't popular in the areas where the myths were recorded, we only have one full myth surviving of him. So if the myths were written down in Sweden, it may be Frey who's the great hero of the Marvel comics and the Avengers. Who knows? But his one full myth isn't actually his best, in my opinion, but it's his only one. So this is told in Skirnismal, which is another poem in the Poetic Edda. So Freyr is on Odin's high seat, and he spots a Jotun woman named Gerd, and she is beautiful. Again, remember the gods can marry Jotun women even though they're their enemies. But Freyr still mopes about like a moody teenager about how he can't have her because he doesn't think the gods will let him marry this Jotun. And so he mopes around enough to the point where his parents ask Freyr's servant Skirnir to see what's wrong with their son. And Freyr tells him, and Skirnir says, I will get you that woman Gerd if you give me your magic sword that fights by itself and is super important, and your horse. And then Freyr goes, yeah, of course. And then he gives it over immediately. Skirnir goes to Gerd, and Gerd refuses Skirnir. He offers her golden apples, a golden ring. She turns him down. He threatens her with a sword, and then she still turns him down, so he threatens her with a curse. He says, I'm going to curse you to live in the underworld for all eternity if you don't say yes right now, and she agrees. Skirnir goes back to Freyr, and then Freyr is just upset that he's going to have to wait 3 days for her to get there. But he does end up marrying her. It's not a great myth for Freyr, not a great look. He not only doesn't actually go get his own woman, he gives up a valuable item for her, which we're later going to find out is going to lead to the end of the world. Good job, Frey. And in order to get her, his servant threatens her. He forces her to go. But again, we have to remember that the gods are always going to be the heroes of this myth. They weren't seen, even in this, even though he's acting outside of what the Norse would consider appropriate as being the villains here. So some scholars have noticed that Gerd is related to the word for earth, and Freyr is a fertility god. So by securing his marriage to Gerd, he ensures the fertility of the earth. It's a myth describing how each year there will be another good harvest because Freyr managed to acquire Gerd. If he didn't, then we wouldn't have good crops. So again, even though Freyr doesn't come across great in here, it's a good thing in the Norse mind that he got her. And that brings us to the goddess Freyja. Mik vistu verda vanjas nasta ev ek med ther I Jotunheima. They would call me a lewd and loose woman if I went with you to Jotunheim. So this describes Freyja because she is the main object of desire for the Jotnar. She is kind of like Gerd, but on the opposite side. She is a goddess of fertility, of love, war, magic, death, and beauty. And just like Gerd is a symbol of fertility, so is Freyja. So if the Jotnar manage to get Freyja, they will take away the fertility of the earth, just as if Freyr gets Gerd, he will gain the fertility of the earth. Freyja is the most widely popular goddess. She is the only goddess to receive her own poem in the Poetic Edda. She has a magical chariot driven by cats. It's not clear if the cats are giant cats or regular-sized cats. I prefer to think of them as regular-sized cats pulling her chariot across the sky. She also has a magical necklace called the Brasingaman. It's kind of like her most famous magical object. She has a boar as well that she rides, and a feather cloak that lets her turn into a falcon. She usually lets Loki borrow it, though. So Freyja, like Odin, is a wandering god, a wandering goddess. So she has a husband named Oth, and Oth is always off in the world, and Freyja misses him, so she cries tears, and her tears are tears of gold. So a kenning for gold is the tears of Freyja, or she also goes under many names like Odin. One of them is Mardal, so the tears of Mardal. And she usually searches for her husband, Oth, in the form of a falcon. So she was believed to be flying around as a falcon and crying tears of gold. And that brings us to Loki. Vis tu ev thu in genger agis holier I a thought sumbul at sjol hropi og rogi ev tu is a hol regen a ther munutol der a thought. I will go to Agir's hall and see this feast. I will bring them slanders and rumors and mix their mead with misery. So Loki is a trickster, shapeshifter, and now Marvel movie star. He is impulsive, clever, and persuasive. The typical Loki myth structure is usually this. Loki does something incredibly dumb and impulsive for no discernible reason, and then he has to creatively find his way out of it. So this is an example of this, the forging of the gifts. So while Thor's wife, Sif, is asleep, Loki cuts her hair, her beautiful golden hair, which is a big important aspect of her. He does this for no reason, and Thor threatens to break every bone in Loki's body, unless he fixes it. So Loki has gotten himself into serious trouble for no good reason, so he has to find a way out of it. He goes to the dwarves, because they make all the good stuff, and they make him new hair for Sif. I don't know how that works, but somehow they make him new hair for Sif. And they also make two new gifts. They make Odin's spear, Gungnir. This is how Gungnir is made. And they make Freyr's ship, Skidbladnir, the ship that can be folded up. And Loki gets these gifts. This has worked out great for Loki. Not only has he fixed his error with Thor's wife, he has two new gifts to make himself closer to the rest of the gods. That's great. So Loki does something stupid for no discernible reason. He goes to two more dwarves, Eitri and his brother, and he says, look at these great gifts I got. I bet my head that you can't make three better gifts. And they said, bet, we'll do it. So they make Gullinbursti, Freyr's boar, which we discussed. They make a golden arm ring called Draupnir, which makes 8 copies of itself every 9th night. And then they make Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. Loki starts to get nervous, so he turns into a fly and starts buzzing around while they're forging the hammer, and he manages to distract them enough where they make the hammer's handle too short. But still, the hammer is otherwise done, so they bring the 6 gifts to the gods. Freyr gets, first of all, the 3 judges are the big 3, Freyr, Odin, and Thor. So Freyr gets Gullinbursti and Skidbladnir. Odin gets Gungnir and Draupnir. And Thor gets Sif's hair and Mjolnir. And even though the gods say all the gifts are great, Mjolnir is by far the best gift, even though its handle is too short. It is definitely the best thing ever, so therefore Loki loses the bet, and he's going to lose his head. He has gotten himself into serious trouble for no good reason, and so the dwarves go chop off Loki's head. But Loki creatively finds his way out of it. He says, wait. I said you could have my head. I never said you could have my neck. My neck is mine, and I don't think you can cut off my head without cutting off some of my neck. So you can't cut off my head. And the dwarves, rather than saying, okay, we'll take half your head, are all like, well, that makes sense. We can't cut off your head, I guess. So instead, to compensate, they sew Loki's lips shut. So this image I showed earlier is believed to be one of the few Viking Age depictions of Loki. And the reason for that is that his lips look like they're sewn shut. So if you want to know what the Vikings thought Loki looked like, he had a cartoonish curly mustache, apparently. Anyway, so Loki is a bit of an odd case. He's an outsider. He has no great home or hall like the rest of the gods, and it's kind of debatable how much of a god he is. His mother is a goddess, but his father is a Jotun. And that's a very odd combination. Usually it's the other way around. Most of the gods have Jotun mothers, and that's acceptable. But the father being a Jotun is a little less good overall. There are a few minor examples of this, but Loki is the main one. Still, he's counted among the gods, but he has a wife who's a goddess, and he has another wife who's a Jotun. So he's kind of in both camps, and we're going to see how far that goes. Also, interestingly, even if he's counted among the gods, he wasn't worshipped at all by the Vikings. There are no place name evidence that indicates he was worshipped. He was mostly a character in the myths, but wasn't worshipped as a god. But despite being an outsider, Loki has a connection to the gods because he is, of course, the brother of Odin. So Loki is the blood brother and companion of Odin. So they did a Norse ritual that makes you the blood brother with someone, where you mix your blood with them within the earth, and essentially you treat them like a brother. There's evidence that in some versions of the myth, Loki may have been Odin's biological brother. It's complicated, I can't get into all of it here, but that name appears as one of Odin's brothers, and it looks like Loki, and it could be Loki, but we can't go into it right now. Loki is also the traveling companion of Thor. He often shows up with Thor and goes on journeys with Thor. We saw in the tale of the wedding, he goes with Thor there. And Thor is consistently the only god who can keep Loki in check because Loki is genuinely terrified of him. There's a time where he shows up at a party, no one wants him there, he's insulting everyone, and he won't leave, and then Thor shows up and Loki says, I'll only leave for you, don't kill me, goodbye. Loki is also the father of three great monsters. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, who we discussed earlier, Fenrir, who's the great wolf that's going to devour Odin at Ragnarok, and Hel, who's the ruler of the underworld. So it's determined by the gods that these three are going to cause doom for them. So they get rid of most of them. They throw Jormungandr into the Sea of Midgard, which is how Thor finds it there when he fishes him. Hel is banished to Niflheim, Hel, to be the ruler of the underworld. Fenrir, though, is a small wolf at this point, so they keep him with the gods. However, he grows bigger, monstrous, and more terrifying, and the gods realize that if they don't do something soon, he's going to be a big problem. And he's already so scary and so vicious that almost none of them can even approach him. So the gods decide that they're going to tie him up, but because he's a giant wolf, they have to do this subtly. So they say, Fenrir, don't you want to prove how strong and great you are? And Fenrir says, yes, I do. So they say, how about you let us tie you up with chains and then you can break out? Fenrir says, oh, that's awesome, I'll do that. And he easily breaks out every time. Happens again and again. And the gods realize they need to turn to better chains. So they go to the dwarves. And they make a ribbon-like chain called Gleipnir. So nothing that exists can bind Fenrir. So they make the chain out of things that don't exist. Out of the breath of a fish, the spit of a bird, the roots of a mountain, the beard of a woman, the footsteps of a cat, and the sinews of a bear. That last one I don't get. Apparently bears look like they don't have muscles to people. I don't know, but apparently they don't exist to the Vikings. Anyway, so they take this new chain to Fenrir, and Fenrir knows something is up. So he says, I will only let you tie me up with this new chain if one of you puts your hand in my mouth. And so the god Tyr volunteers. He is a god associated with war, justice, and law. He's the god who Tuesday is named after, if you remember. So he puts his hand in Fenrir, they tie him up, and Fenrir can't break free. and then Fenrir bites off Tyr's hand. So Tyr has one hand, but Fenrir is bound. And that brings us to the worst thing that Loki ever did, the death of Balder. Now on my YouTube channel, I have an hour and something long video completely about the death of Balder and every different version of it. I can't spend that long on this, so we're going to give you just the version from Snorri's Prose Edda. So Balder is the son of Odin and Frigg. He's the god of light, and he's loved by everyone. But then one day he starts getting terrible dreams, and the gods worry that something terrible is going to happen to him. So his wife Frigg goes to everything in the world and has it swear not to harm him. Not just people and animals, but inanimate objects. And so because of this, Balder becomes invincible. They can throw weapons and stones at him and he won't be hurt. Loki, for no discernible reason, decides he doesn't like this. So he finds out that Frigg didn't get an oath from one plant called mistletoe. This is usually translated as mistletoe. I don't think it's a great translation, but I just leave it as mistletoe. So Loki finds mistletoe, the plant, and he finds Balder's blind brother Hoth, and he tricks him into using it to kill Balder. Balder dies. The gods find out about this, and they catch Loki. So Loki made Balder's brother kill him. So in turn, they take two of Loki's sons. These aren't the monster sons. These are two random humanoid sons. They turn one into a wolf and make it kill the other son. So just as Loki made a brother killed a brother, now they make Loki's son kill his brother. And they take the guts of the dead son and tie it around Loki and tie him to a stone, and then they place a serpent above Loki's face, and they make it drip venom into his eyes. Loki's goddess wife, Sigyn, holds a bowl over his face to keep the venom out, but every time that the bowl gets full and she needs to empty it, then the venom falls onto his eyes, and he screams and shakes, and that's where earthquakes come from. Of course, Loki will one day be freed at the end of the world at Ragnarok. So this begins with Fimbulvetur, which is a winter which lasts 3 years. If you live in Scandinavia, you know a winter that lasts 1 year is terrifying. So 3, you can understand why they'd be terrified of this. The world overall becomes very savage, ruthless. People break oaths of kinship and loyalty. People turn on each other. In general, morality goes downhill. The sun and the moon are swallowed by giant wolves. Loki and Fenrir break free from their bounds, and Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, slithers onto the earth and spews venom all over it. Surtur, who's a great giant fire Jotun, invades Asgard along with his fiery sons of Muspel, and Loki arrives on a ship with the enemies of the gods. So knowing that all the enemies of the gods are right now invading, Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, blows the Galar horn to alert the gods that the end is coming. Odin gathers his Einherjar, his army he's prepared for this moment, and charges to meet the great wolf Fenrir. He charges at the wolf with his army, and the wolf swallows him whole. So all that preparation, and he ends up dying. Then Odin's son Vidar will avenge him. He'll go up to the great wolf, and he will stamp one foot on the wolf's bottom jaw, grab the top jaw, and then pull the wolf's jaws in half and kill it. It's a pretty cool way to kill a wolf, honestly. Then Thor will go face Jormungandr once again. He will kill the serpent, but then he will take 9 steps and die from the serpent's venom. And then Loki and Heimdall will kill each other, and Freyr will fight Surtur, the great fire Jotun. Freyr, as we remember, was an idiot and gave up his sword, so he will lose this fight and die. Surtur is going to fling fire all over the world, and it will be destroyed. The earth will sink into the sea with everyone dead. It's a pretty rough ending, but it's not over. So the earth will then arise from the sea renewed. The new world will be a better one where crops grow without being sown. And some of the gods survive. Some of the sons of Odin, Vidar, and Vali are alive. Balder and Hoth emerge from the underworld. Thor's sons, Magni and Mothi, survive, and they take their father's hammer and continue his work. It's a new golden age where the problems of before are no longer there. And that, for the most part, is where the story ends. But also, not really, because the gods have become immortal. They appear all over again in pop culture, movies, TV shows, comic books, video games, books, every conceivable thing. And they're more popular today than they ever were when these myths were first told. Nowadays, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who doesn't know who Thor is. So even though, according to this version of the story, the gods are dead, they can't really die, because to die is to be forgotten, and that's not ever going to happen. So. Thank you.